Hello, good morning, and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu Newspaper. These are the topics that we shall be discussing. First up, improved technology to detect IEDs. Recently, 10 Jawans and a driver was killed in Chhattisgarh's Dantewada area. It was triggered by an IED. And this column focuses on that there is a need to have improved technology to detect the IEDs, because the existing technology that we use has its own limitations in detecting the IEDs. Limitations when? Limitations when the metal which is used in IED is small, and also when this IED is placed deep under the soil. And that is what makes it difficult to detect these IEDs and ultimately result in the unfortunate casualties amongst the security forces. Even the other technology that we use, which is known as ground penetrating radar, which basically is a geophysical method which uses the radar pulse to image the subsurface. For example, it can also lead to false alarm. And what is that false alarm? For example, if we use this method, even if the soil was tampered with, even if the soil was used for some other purpose, and if we use the radar impulse to image the subsurface, it will result in a false alarm where there is no IED but the alarm is raised. That is why the column focuses on that we need to have improved technology in detecting the IEDs. But not just that. This attack in Chhattisgarh's Dantewada area, it also points out to another challenging atmosphere today, wherein we can safely say that the Maoists, or those whom we refer to as left-wing extremists, they have still retained their capacity to inflict damages on the security forces and India's paramilitary troops. Not just this, the year was 2009. The then Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, said that this left-wing extremism is the gravest danger to India's internal security. 1 year later, in 2010, the then Home Minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram, said that we will rid the country of left-wing extremism in the next 3 years. In 2019, the then Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, said that these Naxalites will be buried 20 feet under the soil. And this year, in January 2023, the Home Minister said that we will rid the country of left-wing extremism by 2024. But what causes this optimism amongst the members of the political class and the security forces? We have witnessed, according to the MHA statistic, that deaths, fatalities of civilians as well as security forces because of these Maoist and Naxalite attacks, these fatalities have come under 100 in the year 2022, which is lowest in the last 4 decades. Not just that, Indian security forces have established camps or new camps in 175 areas. And do you know what? These 175 areas were previously traditional stronghold of the Naxalites and Maoists. What are we talking about? An attack caused by an IED led to the killing of 10 Jawans and a driver. Now this raises an important issue that we need new technology to detect the IEDs. But not just that, when we look at the statements issued by the political class right from 2009 onwards, we get a sense that because the statistics are in our favor, where there have been less than 100 killings of security forces and civilians by Naxalites and Maoists in 2022, which was lowest in the past 4 decades, where we have also seen that the security forces have established camps in 175 new areas, and these new areas used to be the traditional stronghold of the Naxalites and the Maoists. We get a sense that we have one left-wing extremism is over in this country. But this false alarm or this false sense of victory we have seen previously as well. Previously in 1972, when Charu Majumdar, who was a leader, a Maoist leader who was responsible for setting up, establishing Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist. When Charu Majumdar was arrested, and after some time he also died, and then the security forces, the political class said, now the verse is finally over, left-wing extremism is disappearing from this country. But then again, in the 1980s, left-wing extremism or the Maoist ideology or the Leninist ideology, the Naxal ideology, again integrated together when People's War Group was established. And we saw renewed attacks on the security forces, on the civilians as well. Then something else happened. Kondapalli Sitharamaya, another important Maoist ideologue, he was also arrested. And then we saw the disintegration of the communist parties, of the Maoist and Leninist ideology. We saw the disintegration of these outfits. And it led to the surrender, it led to the arrest of more than 10,000 party workers as well. So what are we saying? If the number of attacks by Maoists and Naxalites is reducing every single year, if the security forces have established new camps in areas which were previously dominated and the strongholds of the Maoists and Leninists, of the Naxalites, that does not mean that we have claimed or we can claim victory over the left-wing extremism in India. Because at least two times in the past, we claimed similar victory. When in 1972, Charu Majumdar was arrested and then he died. Some people alleged he was killed in custody. But be that as it may, in 1980s, then we saw again the resurgence of the left-wing extremism groups in India. And then we saw Kondapalli Sitharamaya was arrested. It led to the arrest and surrender of more than 10,000 party activists. Even there, left-wing extremism is rearing its ugly head every now and then. Which reminds us of Mr. Prakash Singh. Prakash Singh is ex-DGP of Border Security Force. He is also the author of The Naxalite Movement in India, a book, A Naxalite Movement in India. According to Mr. Prakash Singh, there are two problems that we are facing. Problem number one, when it comes to outsourcing the operations against the left-wing extremists, what we have basically done, we have outsourced all these operations to Central Armed Forces. So whenever we have to engage with the Naxalites, with the Maoists, we outsource this operation to Central Armed Forces. Thereby, what we do, we ignore the local police. And it is this local police who know the language. It is this local police who has the knowledge of the terrain. And unless and until you involve the local police in these anti-insurgency operations, in these operations against left-wing extremists in India, we will not be able to claim victory. Something which Mr. Prakash Singh says, contrary happened in Punjab. In Punjab, we were able to defeat separatism because the Punjab police was always at the forefront of the anti-terrorism operations. And that is something that we need to do in left-wing extremism areas as well. Involve local police who has the knowledge of the language, who has the knowledge of the terrain, include them, make them the central point of our operations against the left-wing extremism, then we will win this war. That's problem number one. Problem number two, Mr. Prakash Singh says that right since independence, according to Planning Commission report of 2008, erstwhile Planning Commission report of 2008, of which Mr. Prakash Singh was also a member, he says that our developmental policy, which we have established right since independence, we are focusing on development of these tribal areas, of these Naxalite areas, and we are insensitive to their needs as well as aspirations as well as their concerns. Mr. Prakash Singh says, yes, these tribals, yes, these areas, the civilian population in these areas which is affected by the left-wing extremism, yes, they need schools, yes, they need hospitals, yes, they need education, they need infrastructure, but what they do not need is capital intensive projects. What they don't need is capital intensive factories, because by introducing capital intensive factories, what it leads to displacement of the legitimate owners of that land, or the tribals, or those who claim this land, and it also leads to deforestation. And that is why Mr. Prakash Singh says that we need to reorient our developmental program in such a manner that it is sensitive to the needs, wishes, aspirations of the entire community of this left-wing extremism areas. And at the same time, Mr. Prakash Singh argues that we need to engage with these Maoists and we need to have a dialogue with them. He asks if we can have dialogue with the Nagas, if we can have dialogues with those who are preaching secession in northeast areas, why can't we involve these Maoists and Naxalites in the dialogue as well? We can talk to others, we should talk to them as well. And this won't be surrender. This should not be seen as a sign of weakness when we are engaging with the Maoists and the Naxalites, but this should be seen as a sign of magnanimity. So what we need to do, we need to engage with them, have a dialogue, and at the same time bring in the local police because they have the knowledge of the terrain and the language, and ultimately through this twin approach, two-pronged approach, we can win the war over terrorism, over left-wing extremism in India. And that is what you need to understand from this topic. Let's look at another editorial, More Than a Story. This is regarding a movie, Kerala Story. This movie, the filmmakers claim that the story needs to be told. Why? Because 32,000 women, girls, have disappeared from Kerala to join an Islamic State, which is a terrorist group, to join ISIS. Then there is another group which claims that this is a propaganda movie. This is based on falsehood, and this movie should be banned. In fact, those who oppose this movie, they even went to the Supreme Court, asking the Supreme Court that you should ask the filmmakers to put out a disclaimer that this is a fictional story, it has no resemblance to true events. Supreme Court rejected this petition, but gave the option to these petitioners that you can move the Kerala High Court. And what Kerala High Court did, the filmmakers agreed before the Kerala High Court that we will put out a disclaimer, that we cannot claim accuracy. We cannot claim accuracy of the events that we have projected in this video, and at the same time, they withdrew the teaser of the movie. Because the teaser of the movie, which claims that 32,000 women, 32,000 girls from Kerala have disappeared and joined the Islamic State, they have withdrawn this teaser. But ultimately, this editorial claims that banning is not a solution. Because once the movie has been cleared by Central Board of Film Certification, then there is no reason, there should be absolutely no demand to ban a movie. Because look at it this way. Movies draw their strength from Article 19, Clause 1 of the Constitution, which deals with freedom of speech and expression. But freedom of speech and expression is not absolute, that you would know. There are reasonable restrictions on your freedom of speech and expression. And there are 8 reasonable restrictions which are imposed on freedom of speech and expression under Article 19, Clause 2 of the Constitution. And which are these reasonable restrictions? Your creative expression can be restricted on the grounds of sovereignty and integrity of India, on the grounds of security of the state, on the grounds of friendly relations with foreign states, on the grounds of morality or decency, on the grounds of incitement to an offense, on the grounds of public order, on the grounds of contempt of court as well. falsehood, or even if the movie is a propaganda, even if, we're not suggesting even for once that this is a propaganda movie, but let's assume for the sake of an argument that this is a movie based on propaganda. On the grounds of propaganda, you cannot impose restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression. So on what grounds can the petitioners call for banning the movie? That's number one. Number two, then we can take recourse to public order. That since this movie has the potential of destabilizing the public order, that's why we can approach the court and call for the restriction on this movie. But look at me carefully. The First Amendment of the US Constitution, it gave freedom of press to the citizens of United States. It enlarged the scope of freedom of speech and expression in United States. And the same First Amendment to Indian Constitution imposed restriction on the freedom of speech and expression. Because this ground public order as a reasonable restriction on your freedom of speech and expression, it was not originally part of the Constitution. It was inserted into the Constitution by the First Amendment to Indian Constitution. At that time, Pandit Nehru was the Prime Minister. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was in the opposition. Mr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee said, we should trust the people. Don't impose public order as a reasonable restriction on your freedom of speech and expression. So Mr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee is telling Mr. Nehru, trust the people, and Mr. Nehru is replying, trust the state, because the state will impose restrictions on your freedom of speech and expression on the grounds of public order. And there are some who say that look at the laws surrounding hate speech in India. Look at the laws surrounding restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression in India. One such law is Section 295 capital A of Indian Penal Code. What is this section talking about? It talks about that if there is a deliberate, if there is a mischievous attempt to outrage the feelings of any section of citizens by insulting their religion or religious beliefs, then it is a crime. And this section was introduced in 1927. That's why people say that all these laws in India, we have a colonial hangover. It is because of the gift of the colonial powers that we have restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression. But that is not entirely true. Because our society also believes in this. Our post-colonial history also believes in this. Look at laws surrounding religious conversion. Religion is a touchy issue in India. Not just that, look at Representation of the People Act. Representation of the People Act, it prohibits religious appeals during elections. So what are we discussing? There's a movie, Kerala Story. There are some who say this story deserves to be told because the women have disappeared from Kerala to join a terrorist group, which is ISIS. There are others who claim that this is a propaganda movie and as such should be banned. What should be the point of view of a civil services aspirant? Banning is not a solution. Why? Because if you claim freedom of speech and expression, then you have to look at it from the prism of the Constitution. Constitution imposes only 8 grounds on the basis of which your freedom of speech and expression can be restricted. Just because a movie is propaganda or based on falsehood, that does not mean you can ban that movie. But then there are petitioners who take a recourse to other laws. For example, Section 295A of Indian Penal Code. There are laws surrounding religious conversion, which basically means there is Representation of the People Act as well, which prohibits religious appeal during elections. So whether it is colonial India or post-colonial India, which means the Indian state as well as the society believes that religious sensibility should not be affected. Religious feelings should not be affected. And propaganda basis on the religion should not be allowed in India. This is the society's demand. But then how can we become a society which is tolerant? Banning is not a solution. Write a review of a movie. Write a review of the book. Make a counter movie. But we should not ban any movie or any book for that matter or any piece of art just because it is offending you. Because freedom of speech and expression should also include freedom to offend and ask uncomfortable questions. Because if you cannot offend somebody, then you have not exercised your freedom of speech and expression carefully. But that's not the only point. What we need to also understand from the Civil Services Examination point of view, that we need to work in such a manner that we overcome assassin's veto. And what is this assassin's veto? In France, Charlie Hebdo published cartoon lampooning the Prophet of Islam. What happened to them? The assassins came and killed them. We don't need that. Assassin's veto, then we have mobs, street power. You claim that movie Padmavati is lampooning the grand history of the Rajput community and as such should be banned. So mobs can swarm the streets of India and claim that this particular piece of art would have the tendency to violate and vitiate public order and as such should be banned. We don't even need that. And we don't even need hypocrisy. Because there are some who say Parzania as a movie should have been communicated well, should have been allowed to be screened in Gujarat. And the same set of people would say that Kashmir Files or Kerala Story should not be made or should not be broadcast or should not be streamed. So that hypocrisy we have to deal with, which reminds me of Milton. Milton is one of the oldest defenders of toleration in the world. But Milton, what he did, he excluded Catholics from the ambit of toleration. So freedom of speech and expression is sacred. And without freedom of speech and expression, this democracy will not flourish to its maximum potential. That is why there can be debate, there should be debate, there can be contrarian views, there can be contrarian movies, books, art forms, but banning is not a solution. Because this editorial claims, if you ban a particular movie, it will increase the curiosity around that movie. And if the purpose of that movie was propaganda, that purpose will be served. So banning is not a solution, but false narratives and propaganda should be countered, but not through a ban, through meaningful engagement. That's something that you need to know regarding this editorial more than a story. Let's look at another important column, a position paper, China's image and what it means. Yesterday, the foreign ministers of China, Afghanistan and Pakistan, they met. And what did they decide? They decide to extend China's Belt and Road Initiative to Afghanistan. I'm sure you're aware of what is this Belt and Road Initiative, which means China will now invest heavily in Afghanistan. That's number one. But this is not an isolated event. Few months more ago, what also happened? There were talks between the Chinese companies and the Taliban government in Afghanistan. And what these Chinese companies wanted, they wanted to explore minerals, lithium reserves in Afghanistan, which according to some reports, these lithium reserves in Afghanistan, they may be equal to the reserves that we have in Bolivia regarding lithium. There were also talks where the Chinese companies will be offered to extract copper from the ores in Afghanistan. But not just that. This year itself, there was an agreement between the China and Afghanistan, the Taliban Afghanistan, where China is now allowed to mine oil in the northern Afghanistan area Amu Darya area. But that's not the only point. The point is now China has published what it calls a position paper on Afghanistan. What is our position on Afghanistan? And what is their position of Afghanistan? Number one, they respect the independence of Afghanistan, the sovereignty of Afghanistan, the territorial customs of Afghanistan. That is something that we respect. And China says that Afghanistan is moving from a phase of, it's in a transition right now, because when US invaded Afghanistan, US disregarded the tribal customs of Afghanistan and tried to impose its own definition, its own version of democracy in Afghanistan. So now Afghanistan is in a transition from a period of turmoil now to relative stability under the Taliban. These are Chinese words, not mine. But the point is, this position paper of China, it talks about what is our position on Afghanistan. We respect your independence. We respect your sovereignty. We respect your territorial integrity. We respect your customs. We respect your practices as well. And what US did, it was primarily out of their own greed. They tried to impose their own version of democracy on you, disregarding, being insensitive to the customs or the rich history of Afghanistan, according to China. And what China is also asking and saying in this position paper is that there is close to $9 billion of money which is stashed abroad, and this money belongs to Afghanistan's central bank. This money Afghanistan is not able to use. Why? Because there is a ban. Why? Because the foreign countries, United States for example, it has a sense that this money can be used to fuel terror activities in Afghanistan. That is why Afghanistan is not allowed to cash in this $9 billion reserves in foreign countries, which is Afghanistan central bank's money. They're not able to encash it. And China says this decision should be reversed. China further says that we should involve Afghanistan, we should involve the Taliban government in Afghanistan, but we should have such an atmosphere where we can exclude United States. So engage with Taliban, engage with Afghanistan, but through those multilateral forums which do not include the United States, such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization, such as Moscow Format Dialogue, such as the foreign ministers meeting which just happened recently as well. It is through these means that we should be able to engage Afghanistan. And what this position paper tells us, it tells us about the image that China is trying to create in today's world. China previously, and even today, is known as an expansionist power. It wants to expand its territory. But at the same time, it is indulging in some conflicts with the neighboring countries as well. Conflict over Taiwan, conflict over Hong Kong, conflict with Japan, conflict with South Korea, conflict with India, conflict with Australia, conflict with various countries. But at the same time, China is now trying, through its various adventures, to just junk this image of an expansionist power and become some sort of a pacifier, some sort of a peacemaker, some sort of a deal maker, which is now trying to, squeeze into that place which is vacated by the exit of United States. And look at the recent events where China brokered peace talks between two sworn enemies, Saudi Arabia and Iran, where China is now trying to build rapport with Russia, Pakistan, to build some sort of stability in Afghanistan. So this position paper, it not only tells us what is the Chinese position on Afghanistan, but it also tells us what China is trying to do. China is trying to have a makeover of its image from being viewed as an expansionist power which wants to expand its territory, which wants to create conflicts where there exists none, to an image of a pacifier, of a deal maker, of a role, of an important role in the world politics, where it wants to bring various countries together, excluding the United States, because the policies of United States since Donald Trump has been in such a manner that the traditional authority which was imposed by United States, it's fast disappearing. But what this means to India, for example, India and China, they share similar concerns vis-a-vis the Taliban's Afghanistan. And what are these concerns? These concerns deal with terrorism. For example, Chinese investments in Afghanistan. We saw recently there was an attack on a hotel in Kabul. And this hotel was very popular with the Chinese nationals. There have been some attacks on the Chinese nationals in Afghanistan as well. So China wants to come closer to Afghanistan, keeping its own interests in mind. And at the same time, China does not want extremism to flow from Afghanistan to Xinjiang province in China. Because there is a good influence of East Turkestan Islamic movement, which was founded by Hassan Mahsoon in the 1990s. And the principal objective of this movement was to establish Islamic State in the Xinjiang province of China, which was dominated by the minority Uyghurs. So China has an interest in having a peaceful Afghanistan so that Afghanistan cannot use its territory, cannot allow the use of its territory for terrorism activities against the Chinese interests. And this is where Indian interest and Chinese interests also converge. And then at the same time, China is now engaging with Russia, is always engaging with Pakistan. China and Pakistan are all-weather friends, and basically it leaves India out. So considering this position paper, considering the outcomes of the various foreign ministers meeting that China is having on Afghanistan, involving Russia as well, Indian policy makers have to be very, very careful, because China has also engaged Iran. Iran, with whom we share diplomatic relations as well as cultural ties dating back centuries. And we have lots of investment in Iran as well. Chabahar port is one example. That means these Chinese adventures or maneuvers in our neighborhood points to a very difficult scenario for our policy makers, and that's how we will have to engage. Done? Great. Let's look at another topic. Topic number 4, Karnataka polls, EC issues advisory on advertisements. There is something known as election silence, or a period of election silence, which is defined in the Representation of the People Act 1951. According to this, 48 hours before the end of polling is a period of election silence where no political party can campaign and canvass for votes, no propaganda can be allowed. For example, today in Karnataka, election campaigning will end at 5 o'clock. And from 5 o'clock will begin the period of election silence. Which means if the voting is on 10th of May, and let's suppose the voting ends at 5 p.m. on 10th of May. 5 p.m. 10th of May, calculate 48 hours, that period is of election silence. And it is in this election silence period that no campaigning is allowed. Now, what Election Commission has done, Election Commission has told political parties as well as the newspapers and publishers that if a political party wants to publish a newspaper advertisement in this period of election silence, it has to take the permission of Election Commission's Media Certification and Monitoring Committee, without which you will not be allowed to put out an advertisement. And even this advertisement should not call for asking people to vote for you or asking people to vote out the incumbent government. That is not allowed. In January this year, for the first time, Election Commission said this period of election silence applies and extends even to tweets put out by political parties and their handles, saying even tweets calling for the people to come out in large numbers and vote for their political party or vote for the government or vote out the government, these tweets during the period of election silence even is not allowed. So what you need to know from the prelims perspective is what is this election silence period? Done? Let's look at the last topic. In unanimous decision, Arab League readmits Syria after 11-year absence. Let's look at some of the facts related to the Arab League. Arab League was founded in 1945 in Cairo, previously called Cairo in Egypt. And there were 6 members. Initially, there were 6 members who were part of the Arab League. Who were these 6 members can be asked in your prelims examination. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, Jordan. There was another country known as Lebanon, Egypt. These were the 6 countries which were originally part of the Arab League in 1945 when it was created, when it was founded in Cairo. And right now it's a 22-member organization. Syria, in the year 2011, it was dismissed or thrown out of Arab League because of the stability in Syria, because of the civil war in Syria. Now Bashar al-Assad can be allowed to participate in the Arab League summit, which is going to be held this month in Saudi Arabia. So Syria, after 11-year absence, has been readmitted to the Arab League. These are the facts that can be important for your prelims examination. Okay, now let's look at 2 mains-based questions for your practice. Question number 1 on Taliban. India and China share similar concerns and therefore must engage with each other for mutual benefit as well as regional peace. Comment. Question number 2. Restrictions to freedom of expression in India are often cast as a colonial era hangover, but they are also rooted in the popular feelings of society and are in a sense reflective of the local norms. Comment. These are the 2 questions for your practice for your upcoming mains examination, and that is it from us today in the daily Hindu newspaper analysis. And if you like this video, don't forget to press the like button, drop in your comments after the stream is over, and see you tomorrow with another discussion on tomorrow's The Hindu newspaper. See you tomorrow. Till then, have a great time.